I am Ken Toller. I'm currently steering the security ship over at Filecoin Foundation. So I hope you all, enjoyed the talks and all the virtual sessions today so far. I know I have. I'm going to be pretty short, so thanks for giving me about 10 minutes of your attention. But in that window, I really want to unpack what we've built and are still building in the security program since I joined around 18 months ago. Um, it's been an interesting journey so far. I think now, security on its own is already this sort of big, three-headed hydra. You toss in the decentralized sprawl of Web3, and you've got all of these different methods of folks tackling security across projects. Every project attacks the problem differently. Every foundation attacks the problem a little bit differently. Some spin up these sort of audit teams, others kind of rely on these loose volunteer collectives. And I think that we've taken a best of both worlds approach that respects the core tenets of decentralization and still delivers concrete, always on protections for all of our constituents. And so I just wanted to start with, why we approach security the way that we do, at least at Filecoin Foundation. Um, our guiding principle is pretty simple. We feel like security should be a built-in integrated utility and not this annoying speed bump everyone has to go through. And in practice, that really, to us, means a few things. One is that we can't have any of these centralized command centers that I think still exist in Web3, and we're really working hard to make sure that we aren't one of those. We want to meet the developers, operations folks, researchers where they are already working. That's in pull requests, in Slack threads, in Discord servers, Telegram. We don't want folks to have to learn new ticket queues and sit in the sort of ivory tower gatekeeper sort of security methodology. We also think that things should be frictionless so that if everyone at some point needs to go through an audit for their project um, or some sort of security review, and we feel like you should be able to grab one of these audits without 6 weeks of going through vendor roulette. And if you have a bug, then really you should be able to submit it quickly and know that it's getting to the right people. And so really our goal is to make sure that the secure path in Filecoin is the easiest path so that teams can naturally choose to use these tools and use these services. And I think that the other thing is, as we just saw through all of the governance, we don't really have the authority and don't want the authority to sort of yell at folks to comply across a decentralized ecosystem like this. And honestly, we don't want to do that. And who wants that job, really? Instead, we want to make sure that we're seeding this culture of trust and accountability so that when teams are seeing other teams ship faster through using the services that we're trying to provide, that mindset will spread and the usage of these tools will increase. And I think that that's the cycle and the engine behind every program that we've launched and that we want to continue to work on. And I want to talk through those four core programs. So the first and probably the most complicated and in my experience difficult to maintain and please contributors um, is the incident response network. It's that idea that you wake up, you have your coffee, and someone is screaming about some glitch or a metric that's gone off the wall, and not knowing who to call. And in the decentralized world, the answer is sort of like everybody. So we just reach out to who we know, and chats spin up, and so we've been working really hard to build really this volunteer incident response grid that incorporates senior engineers and representation from Lotus and Forest and DRAND and Curio and other mission critical teams that have very graciously signed up for on-call shifts that are available across time zones. We've also put together a bot in the Slack channels that allow these folks to initiate an alert that drops people into a shared document, spins up the Zoom, and logs an issue instantly. And even then, we know that it's still probably not attractive enough. But when we get this right, it means that there's no more of these parallel Slack messages or conflicting fixes or folks that are unaware of what's happening, and that everyone with a deep context of an incident, if it occurs, is in the same room right away. And that is really the goal of the incident response group. And the biggest challenge is coordinating all this without that central authority. And we're being very allergic to doing it in that way. The second big program we launched was the Auditor Network. And we know and are very familiar with how difficult it can be to get an audit done well. And we know that the audit market can really feel like a carnival. You've got bright lights, loud noises, all these fancy colors, and price tags that sort of make you dizzy, and wildly varying quotes and proposals. But we're trying to do a lot of that legwork for teams. We've taken the time to vet over 20 different audit firms, both for Filecoin know-how and understanding. And we've sorted them by their specialization. So smart contracts, threshold cryptography, distributed storage stacks. And then we've pre-negotiated some incentives for teams to make sure that folks have the opportunity to use a quality auditor at a sane rate. And so whether you're a small team or a single developer or a giant, well-funded project, you can really book an auditor that actually speaks the Filecoin language and have an audit proposal and a quote in 1 to 2 weeks. And we really want to make sure that that process gets faster. And that way, we know that quality audits are getting out into the ecosystem. The third core program, which is probably the longest running and really the biggest kudos here goes to Parth, who anybody that's worked with the bug bounty program knows Parth, who has shepherded this from day one. We still pay top dollar for in-scope vulnerabilities, but we've also realized that a lot of researchers are finding things that sit just outside of scope, and we tossing those away sort of felt wrong. So we're rolling out a sort of second channel, a public leaderboard, because we know that bragging rights matter to researchers. That will allow us to offer swag and points for some of these valid, near miss issues that maybe aren't in scope. And so really we want to make sure that if you make the network and the ecosystem safer, you get incentivized and credited and rewarded, period. And we're working on that, and that should be launching in the next couple of months. And then finally, the one I'll probably talk about most today is kind of our favorite science experiment turned workhorse. We partnered with Antithesis and spun up sort of this miniature Filecoin universe that stress tests every weird edge case we can dream up and a bunch that we can't. It's kind of this chaos engineering on autopilot. We spray randomness across hundreds of thousands of execution paths. You can kind of think of this as almost like a holodeck for the protocol. We handed the binaries that run on mainnet, plus a bunch of invariants and things that we can do so that we can really create things that we'll never see for years. And so it introduces a lot of these unique execution paths per run, and it goes far beyond what manual fuzzing or unit tests can touch. And right now, we have a small set of core components, but we want to introduce more projects and more teams to this autonomous testing because we believe it's a real game changer. A typical CI probably runs 4,000 or so parallel paths in an hour. And I'll talk more about these statistics, but in 6 months, we've clocked over 200,000 execution paths and about 1,900 compute hours. And in the future, theoretically, this could all be done before code ever touches calibration or mainnet. And so the long story short here is that Antithesis is turning what used to be this occasional moonshot fuzzing exercise where we have these isolated fuzzing exercises into something that runs daily in this factory grade safety net. And I think it's the closest thing that we've found to almost a crystal ball for protocol bugs. And I think that the numbers you'll see in a minute when we go through that is show that it's already paying off. But before that, I do want to talk about the last sort of project that we've touched lightly over the last 18 months, and that's our Web3 security maturity model update. We rolled this out, and I think that events since then across Web3 and have proven why something like this matters. we've seen over the last 12 months that real projects are getting actively attacked because of operational slip-ups like mismanaged keys, unclear merge rights, supply chain attacks. We've seen single-member multi-sig wallets, and I think that these things keep coming. And there's this allergy to this sort of Web 2 lens on things that we understand. And so this really takes the fundamentals of what we've learned in security over the last 20, 30 years in cybersecurity and aligns it with the realities of Web3 so that we can really aim ourselves squarely at those types of attack patterns. You know, it covers things like key management and community safety rails and things that we've been talking about today around governance, while still maintaining this understanding of identity and anonymity that is a forced reality in Web3. And we're turning all of these checkpoints into this interactive self-assessment tool, which is under development. I plan on launching this in the next month or so, which will give projects and teams this a quiz that allows you to flag where your biggest operational gaps are, and then offer next steps about what you can do to close those gaps yourself. With that, we'll go to the numbers. I think it's important. What I want to highlight here is speed. And speed in the sense of how fast do problems disappear? Because after looking at this over the last 18 months, I think that if you look at the three sort of projects that we have, you know, we complete tech fixes for issues that we discover, incidents or bugs or whatever it is, in most of the time less than 24 hours. But the time it takes for a full closeout of an issue can vary. And if you look at autonomous testing, the amount of time it takes us to find an issue and close it and then be on to the next thing is about 3.5 days. To go through the process it takes to interact with a researcher, go through a reward payout and incentive, even though the issue is closed in less than 24 hours, the full closeout is probably a month or sometimes over, just based on all of that communication. And that takes people's time and really takes them away from things that can be used elsewhere. And then if you look at something like an incident response, even if you introduce all this automation, you have postmortem and documentation and lessons learned and action items that we need to track to make sure that these things don't happen again and monitoring to insert. And so if you notice the theme, it's basically that the older a bug is when we discover it, and the more humans that we involve in the process, the longer that total closure takes, which is why pushing things like an autonomous test bed is a game changer for us because it allows us to catch all of these nasty, small, unrealized bugs before a user ever bumps into them. And so if we look at that testing, we've run the numbers and we've had Antithesis help running these numbers that we've done about 10 and a half years of testing in about 6 months, given all of the execution paths that we've executed and all of the things that we've worked on. And we found some very rare issues that might have taken years to find if we let those run their course in mainnet. So we are working on moving the discovery of security issues closer and closer in a decentralized ecosystem without having access to everyone's code and being a part of their CI/CD pipelines, you know, from the centralized authority. We're sort of allowing folks to volunteer code into these systems so that we can work to discover these things faster. And lastly, we've funded about 18 audits in the last 18 months. We want to fund more, and we continue to inject as much as we can into that. So please, you know, reach out if you need a project audited. So, you know, really in closing, just highlighting the core projects that we have and knowing that some of them are in product in development. You know, we want volunteers and help and folks to work in these collaborative working groups. You know, it just becomes better and better if we can get more folks to contribute and and treat this security as this service layer and not as a badge of approval. We want to let the community expertise drive the responses that we have. And we want to make sure that we're using as much automation and things like autonomous testing to pull out these risks before they get to something like a bug bounty program. So if any of that resonates, or if you just want to, work with us or hack on something, please reach out, security@phil.org, or you can hit me up on the Slack. We're always looking for more eyeballs, more scenarios, more responders, and want to make it easy for security to be something that comes along with working on Filecoin.